Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Madeline Hennigan, co-director of Writing on the Wall, and this event tonight is brought to you by the Writers' Bloc, our virtual and dedicated centre to writing in all its forms. Many of you will know that we launched the Bloc in the midst of lockdown. We've been in lockdown for 12 months now, to nearly to the day, and it was a response to the mental health and social situation arising from the situation that we found ourselves in. The Writers' Bloc provides a range of activities, workshops, one-to-one support, and the chance to develop and share your work. Every month, we have a new writer on the block who joins us to share their experiences and their expertise. Our latest writer on the block joining us this evening is broadcaster, critic and journalist Bidisha. Bidisha writes for the main UK broadsheets, in particular The Observer and The Guardian. She presents and commentates for BBC TV and radio, Channel 4 News, CNN and Sky News. And her work reflects her concerns with international human rights, social justice and gender in the arts, to just name a few topics that you will see Bidisha cover through her articles and her broadcasting. Her book, Asylum and Exile, Hidden Voices of London, is based on her outreach work in prisons, refugee charities and detention centres. And her latest publication takes the form of an essay entitled The Future of Serious Art. Bidisha is a long-standing friend of WOW and a regular collaborator in our annual WOW Festival. So it's an absolute delight to have her on the block this evening. Bidisha and I will be in conversation, and if you'd like to join us, please put your questions and any points you want to make into the comments box. But first of all, please join me in giving a big virtual welcome to Bidisha.
Madeline, you're way too generous.
No, not at all, not at all. As I say, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back. As you said when we spoke on the phone, 2019, when we last got together at that brilliant event which you hosted and curated with us on Women and TV. And yeah, it was a great time. And I'm sure those times will come back to us soon when we can have an event and we can get together afterwards. There's no more dashing about on trains at any rate. So at this point, I'd be saying, so, you know, how have you fared during lockdown? How's it been for you? But the reading that you're going to share with us first off kind of gives us a bit of insight into how it's been. So should we just get straight into that and then we'll take it from there?
Let's do that, because it means that I don't have to keep turning my head away from you to look at the screen. So I'll just do that now. This is an article that I wrote for The Guardian and The Observer once we were a few months into lockdown. So it came out in August of last year, which really feels like about 1 minute ago to me, because not much has changed. I'll go right into it. During lockdown, opportunities to make new friends have been limited. However, I did encounter one special person who caused me to rethink the way I see everything. Yes, I finally met myself. 2020 has been a wonderful training in mindful self-acceptance, the realistic surrender of hope, and total subjugation to one's circumstances. I celebrated my birthday in late July by doing nothing and with no psychological kickback. 3 cups of tea, lunch and dinner, 12 hours of internet surfing that left no impression, a workout and bed. Same as every day since mid-March 2020. I call this radical abjection. It's a kind of home-based nihilistic feminist Buddhism in which nothing means anything and you embrace the death of the self on the sofa. I used to be committed to the goal of being a fabulous spinster, traveling the world, lunching, going to galleries, wearing big jewelry and fabulous scarves. Now I'm happy to be a common or garden spinster, the domestic variety rather than a wild jungle crone. At first, I resisted this. When lockdown began, we all went through the stages of coming to terms with it. There was the pasta bake stage, the neighborhood vigilante stage, the terrible craft project stage, the Zoom cocktail stage, which seeped into the domestic alcoholism stage. Each one a step down to the cozy basement of ennui, where nothing changes and the only light comes from our screen. I fully accept the psychological stripping down we're all undergoing. Maybe life is not about striving. Maybe it's about resisting the weird nouveau riche yuppie impulse to have a big lockdown makeover and boast about it. Maybe we need to learn how to sit with discomfort and stop thinking that life is meant to be some kind of perpetually unfolding adventure, a scintillating journey where we're always asking, what next? Why do we have to turn our psyches inside out to find our transformed, improved, optimized, and actualized best selves? The current versions are fine enough to be getting along with, surely, given the circumstances. Since we're finally face to face with ourselves, we have an opportunity not to lament, but to count our blessings. By my tally, at hopefully the halfway point of my life, I'm doing better than many people on this planet. I have health, domestic stability, family support, and no debt. I'm choosing to celebrate that, since how I live now may well be how I live forever. I'm ready to celebrate being a spinster who is settled, sanguine, and resigned. During one of the heatwave breaking showers last week, bear in mind this was during the heatwave, I looked out at the suburban street where I've lived all my life and realized that I'd be fine just pottering about at my desk with the lamp on, seeing the same view and writing the odd thing for the rest of my days. In a situation such as a global pandemic, clinging to elaborate fantasies about what life might be like when it's all over is much less practical than looking at what you have and deciding it's okay. The same goes for career fantasies or travel fantasies. Given the global recession to come, the idea of making it seems both impossible and selfish. Our drive and careerism and work ethic clearly got us nowhere. Look at the state of the world. The only people I want to hear from right now are doctors, teachers, and carers, environmentalists, social justice activists, charity workers, and human rights lawyers, not pundits from a bygone era. We need to stop thinking, if you're guilty of this as I am, that we're stars in our own aspirational romantic comedy, heading for fame and happiness. Aren't we just lucky to be alive and in an environment that isn't an actual war zone? There we have it.
I'm laughing. I'm absolutely... Thanks, Bidisha. I have to say, though, spinster is not a word I would have particularly ever associated with you. And I am finding it hard to see you as a neighbourhood vigilante as well.
Oh, but Madeline, believe me, I've got neighbourhood vigilante written all over me, and I'm trying to reclaim spinster. Spinster's a good thing. I'm totally fine with it. Believe me.
Good. Yeah.
Fabulous spinster.
Lovely. You are a fabulous spinster. But I think the thing about that piece for me is, you are looking at what positives can we take out of this situation, and I think that is all we can do in the situation. It is a year today, as I said earlier, and no one's really loving it, but I think it is important. Writing on the wall, we've tried to look at the positives, and even though you said in that article you've written the odd thing, you've actually written quite a bit during lockdown and reflected on lockdown a fair amount in your opinion pieces in the Guardian. And I was reading one where you suggested this is a time that people might be taking stock of their lives and the decisions that they've made, and thinking, is this the direction that I really want to go in? So while you've been taking that stock, have you did any big changes that you feel that you want to make?
It's a fantastic question. I do think the one positive about having this time out is that we're all questioning what we were doing beforehand. I mean, what was I doing, spending loads of time going up and down the country on trains to do one event for almost no money for 1 hour that actually could have gone out to a lot more people if it had been done online. And I questioned why, as a freelancer, why I accepted so many small jobs just for no reason at all, instead of kind of making a standard for myself and putting my foot down a little bit more and carving out my professional identity a bit more. I do also think that this is age dependent. So I have a huge amount of sympathy for teenagers and kids and young adults who are supposed to be just leaving the nest at this age and enjoying university life, and they're stuck at home. It's not the same for me because I'm older than that. So I'm at the point in life where I'm thinking about what I want my life to look like. And part of me wants to be really noble and be a human rights leader, and the other part wants to go on a huge, massive holiday to New York as soon as we're able to go and just eat loads of food and watch and just look at beautiful art in art galleries. There's a tremendous restlessness. So I'm going through phases of taking stock and trying to figure out what my actual values are, and maybe also trying to figure out if I'm okay with the rest of my life looking like the first half did. I think this is a great opportunity to reflect on choices and decisions that we've made, because also not making a choice and not making a decision is a decision in itself. So for all those people out there who like to go with the flow and run with the tide, they're asking themselves if that's the way to live. And all those people who are the opposite and very decisive and who like to fill up their schedule are asking themselves if filling up the work diary, that's mine, is really worth it, and why they're staying so busy and what's important. You know, I'm seeing in my neighborhood people who were literally like probably selling drugs outside the tube station. Like that one guy is suddenly taking up biking. I don't know if it's his own bike, but he's definitely trying to bike around the neighborhood. And I'm like, you go, guy. So people are changing in all sorts of surprising and quite wonderful ways. I don't know if he'll go back to his previous career when we're out of this, but he's on a super health tip now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Things, you know, the new normal is going to be something quite different, I think, when we do get back to a state of out of lockdown. And we'll talk a bit about what that might mean for the arts. I think you're right about it, you know, this situation and how you deal with it being quite age dependent. I think if I'd have been, you know, 21, arrived in a new city to go to university and then been totally in lockdown and not been going clubbing and not been hanging out in the student union, it would have been a totally different viewpoint than I have from my advancing years, shall we say. So, you know, yeah, the situation is going to be quite different and quite different from the art. And as positive as we try to be, I think for freelancers, for freelance artists, it has been quite a difficult time. And you did a really good piece, another opinion piece in The Guardian about that. And how is it, you're clearly a freelancer, how have you fared? Has it been, is it, you know, is it easier for writers in lockdown, do you think? How have you fared and your artistic community around you?
It's been extremely difficult, and a lot of the discussion has focused around the performing arts. So music, gigs, theatre, dance, all of the people who work within those industries, 80% of them are arts freelancers. They're not even on any kind of contract half the time. They're brought in on a per project basis. And of course, that is creative and that's free and that's wonderful if you have a private income. But the overwhelming majority of people on this planet don't have any kind of private income, and they rely on this piecemeal labor, which doesn't come with any benefits at all. So you don't get a pension with these assignments. You don't get health benefits with these assignments. You don't even get advocacy at a legal level if things go wrong for you. You're just a hired worker for a project. It's not just the performing arts, though. It's the same with everything. So film, TV, literature. I mean, do you think that publishers are suddenly buying up loads of new stock. No, they're not. They're delaying their big publications. So there'll be a kind of 4-year tail off after this, where all the things they'd saved up money for, the books they wanted to promote, they're then going to bring those out. They're not hunting for 100 new projects. And so you're seeing this kind of stasis all across every single arts field, including fashion, design, architecture. Just as we're talking here on Zoom, everybody in the arts and culture sector, which is really worth billions of dollars, billions of pounds, is trying to work from home. And we've all, I was going to say we've all taken a pay cut, but even that makes it sound more formal than it is. Our income has dropped massively. The projects just aren't there. The money's just not there. And everyone is very understandably sort of retrenching and just trying to see when the end point is, because the lack of predictability is making everything much worse. We don't know when live performances are going to come back. We don't know when live audiences, even for a very genteel panel discussion, are going to come back at all, because we don't know what the health guidance will be. So it's an extremely worrying time. And that 1% of people who happen to have family money, or who are lucky and live in their family home, and let me just say, this is my family home. We're lucky in the sense that we have a roof over our heads. But if you're talking about career, income, profile, productiveness, it's like a siege situation where you just sort of bunker down and spend the day doing what little work you have, and then spend the rest of the time on Netflix. Maybe that's the best thing to do. The kind of mental anesthesia. It's extremely worrying, and it's impossible to plan. This is why it's so paralyzing as a creative. It's impossible to plan anything. I mean, I'm making films and shooting films remotely, and I know that people are watching them because they're at home and they're clicking on my films, but not everyone can do that. I'm lucky I was well connected to begin with. I'm a film director anyway, so that's all levels of privilege which I had from before. So it's a very worrying time, and I don't want to sugarcoat that or gloss that.
Yeah, it is. And you know, when we first went into lockdown, Writing on the Wall did recognise that freelancers were, you know, arts organisations are not going to have not fared great across the board, but freelancers are really at the coalface, so to speak. You know, the 0-hour contracts extended across all industries, really. You know, that's becoming, that kind of work in practice is becoming much more prolific, really. But yeah, so it is very difficult for freelance artists, but at the same time, art has never been more important than ever. And, you know, the intention, if you like, or the underlying aim of the writer's block is to keep people connected, stimulated, and creative during this period where we are at risk. Our mental health and our well-being is at particular risk. And art, I think, really has come to, you know, really stepped up. Artists and art organisations really stepped up to the plate in this situation, despite the pressures on them. I think, obviously, you get the connection between health and well-being and quality of life and enjoyment. Do you think the kind of authorities that be are taking this on board right now across the institutions, in schools, in all sorts of spheres? Do you think that connection between the arts and health and well-being is being recognised now?
If you're talking at a sort of government and campaigning level, then no, I don't think that the powers that be, or the authorities, as you put it, are really on board with connecting the dots and realizing that art is, number one, it's not capital A art, i.e. going to a very expensive ballet performance on a Saturday afternoon, and B, that it's not just entertainment. I think when you talk about the arts to people who are really high up the tree in the elite, they tend to think that we mean just, oh, it's the entertainment industry. It's fun. Anyone who works anywhere near the actual sector, and anyone who's an artist in any way at all, realizes that art, it just means self-expression. And it means creating something out of nothing. So for me, cookery and food are also art because it's a way of connecting with things which aren't immediately to do with making money. They aren't immediately to do with administrative roles in an office working for a company so somebody else at the top of the company gets rich. It's a way of connecting with yourself and then expressing yourself to the outside world. And that can be a good, bad, or a neutral expression. We all do it. Everybody's expressing themselves all the time. And under lockdown in particular, why do you think we were all baking so much? Why do you think we were all suddenly kind of making these photographs that you see behind me? Because people are desperate to express themselves. I think they're also desperate to create something of beauty. So there's a really lovely grassroots movement, which is all about folk art and knitting and sewing and crochet and making posters and putting the posters up in your front window, because you don't just want to make something beautiful, you want to share it with other people as well. That's all positive. I think my reservation is that I tend to think labor should be paid and art should be supported. I don't like housewife economics, where every person is alone in their house trying to make something and trying to get it off the ground without any support and with a feeling of isolation. I think creative artists should be supported and be supported by institutions and organizations and enterprises. And yes, that money can come from the government, but it can come from lots of other funding bodies as well. And other countries do this. I don't know why it seems a kind of optional extra right now where we are, as if this is some sort of frippery or indulgence. Imagine a world that had no creativity in it at all. No poetry, no art, no theatre, no songs, no fashion even. Even dressing up is a form of self-expression. Imagine a world where we all just worked to make money selling things that were not creative to make someone else rich. So I think art and creativity are incredibly important for, I don't like the phrase mental health, because I feel like everything gets put into that box without us ever explaining what mental health means, for well-being. Basic, simple, every single day well-being. We should be creating art all day, every day, just in our manner of engaging with the world, and not constantly thinking about commerce or advancement.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I'm not really, did you listen to the radio? Radio 4 this morning had a report about children and how stressed children are at the moment, not with just their own concerns, but with the concerns of their families in terms of, income, lots of income, people not being well, all of that they're hearing adults and they're, taking all of this on board. And, our curriculum is not really helping children in any way to develop as healthy and developed young people, really. And I'm just thinking about your essay, towards serious art. Is that the future of serious art? And I really liked how you described your childhood, where you were allowed to play, to invent, to make, to learn, and all of that kind of merged into itself. Or, there was no boundaries between those things. So education and play were, inextricably bound. And we've had enough writers talking about this for long enough. Michael Rosen spearheaded a great campaign, hasn't he, about, just let children use their imagination. And, still that message doesn't seem to be hitting home. But I just wanted to ask you about that, your childhood experience. You talk about it. I loved the essay, actually. I read it over the weekend, and I loved the way you started with that very personal kind of experience, and then, widened out to the whole world. So would you attribute, and then you did go on to have very early success in with your writing. You were published at 16 by a major publisher. So do you attribute that kind of freedom and that kind of, you know, culture, learning culture, exploring culture, that, you know, to that success?
I absolutely do. I'm so glad. Oh, I'm feeding back when I'm talking. I absolutely do. And I completely appreciate that you brought up young people, because of course, for young people, play is learning and learning is play. So there is no boundary at all between making up songs and doing little theatre pieces, or doing what I did, which is do fake radio shows recorded on cassette with my friend who lived next door, and learning broadcasting skills or learning compositional skills. Of course, this boils down to privilege. And I was really lucky in the sense of being incredibly well supported during my formative years. So if I wanted to learn music, I could. If I wanted to go to art class on a Saturday morning and play about with clay, I could. I had a different after school class every day. And I still remember, the schedule to this day. So it was like music theory, orchestra, art club, gym, something else, and then some, like on the next day it was like more orchestra, but like in a different orchestra. And I'm not musical. I mean, I can read music, but I'm not actually talented in that field. But the sheer sense of being supported, the sheer sense of being absolutely met on the level wherever I was at, is really invaluable. And I was given the feeling that, number one, I was capable of anything. Number two, it helps to not be shy. I was never unforthcoming. And three, the idea that one form of creativity is not different from another form of creativity. I absolutely believe, I'm very orthodox and very old fashioned in some senses, and I believe that people should be accomplished. And what I mean by that is, it is a positive thing to know multiple languages. It's a positive thing to be good at sports and the arts. There's no difference for me between being athletic and being artistically creative. They're part of the same thing. And that you should be worldly and well-rounded. Now, those are very 18th century Enlightenment traditional values. They are really Jane Austen values. But I absolutely believe it. But of course, you need so much wealth and privilege to be able to enjoy those things. But you also need the rest of society to support you. There need to be after school clubs which are well funded and have great teachers who want to be there. There needs to be a sense that in your curriculum up to the age of 18, you have a wide diversity of things to choose from. I don't like that we might have a future in which languages are somehow off the table, or you decide at the age of 13 or whatever, whether you're a science person or an arts person. The scientists that I know are incredibly cultured. The bankers that I know are very international and speak 5 languages and are interested in history and architecture. There isn't a real split between any of those things. And it pains me to see the narrowing down of the sophistication that I take for granted. I absolutely think that we should all be exploring things all the time and not be Philistines. I mean, I'm really very angry about this, Madeline. I can't stand Philistinism. This idea that, oh, what is it? Oh, it's very different. Oh, I don't like it. It's foreign. It's different. I don't understand it. I'm not going to explore it. If you start from the age of 4 exploring lots of different things, you become naturally open-minded. And I'd like to see a cultural scene and an educational scene which supports that mentality. And of course, I realize that's incredibly bourgeois, but I don't think those are bad values to have. And, you know, our taxes should be going somewhere. They shouldn't be spent buying military helicopters from the Gulf states. They should be spent on education.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, you know, you talk about the fact that you had certain advantages, but I don't think it really does take a great deal of money to all resources to provide that kind of environment for all children, really. I think it's really comes down to, you know, how we order our society and where we place our priorities. I've got some questions coming in from the audience.
I find it very weird that people are watching us.
Yeah.
Like they're watching us right now.
Yeah, that's the way it is with Zoom. Okay, so question, and I'll come back. Our conversation's not finished. I've got some things I do want to put to you. But just a couple of questions from the audience. What is the book behind you? And can you tell us about the pictures on the wall? What is the story behind the bag hanging on the bookshelf? So, Bidisha, they're not only watching us, people are analysing your bookshelf. So just tell us, what is the book?
Okay, if they're talking about that, that's a Philippa Gregory. It's The Lady, I haven't read it yet. It's The Lady of the Rivers by Philippa Gregory, who's a very, very famous historical novelist. I did medieval literature for my undergrad degree, and I'm very, very into medieval history and medieval art and music particularly. So I tend to buy up any historical novel. There's a beautiful lady on the front in like a flowery bodice. I just go, I'm sure it's great. So I just buy it. It's like an airport purchase. But I think Philippa Gregory is really fab and really good fun. So that's that. This is a bag my mum got me. I'll show you the rest of my bookcases. Like there's lots and lots of books there. And so the art it's mainly by me. So these pictures, I make films and I take stills. So these photographs are by me. And then of course, this painting is clearly by Bridget Riley, the very famous painter. That's by me. That's a family photograph. These photographs are by me. That's my desk diary. And this is where I work all day, every day. And I did that before the lockdown because I work from home. So I need my workspace to be incredibly cozy. And what you can't see is this is an enormous desk. And in front of me, I have there's a window and some more photographs by me on the windowsill. So it has to be somewhere I can spend a few hours every day just focusing and concentrating and listening to the radio. So that's the thing. I'm looksy. I like aesthetics. I notice aesthetics. I like art. I make art. So that's why I like my walls to not be completely bare.
Thanks for that little guided tour. If you think when we first went into kind of lockdown and news reports on Zoom, I'm sure there was all sorts of people organising their bookshelves so that they look very, very the collected works of Lenin or whatever. Okay, I've got a question here, and I'm tempted to say to whoever's asking the question that really they should book on to a one-to-one with you, but I'll share the question and you might like to give a short answer. It's quite detailed. I'd like to ask for advice regarding copyright and publishing and what would be the best way to advertise work. As I say, I think that's a perfect topic to book on to one of your one-to-ones and really get to grips with the situation of that person asking the question. What do you think?
What was the second half of the question? How to advertise their work?
Advertise the work, yeah.
Okay, so copyright's really simple. You can just, I get this all the time, and it actually doesn't really, you don't have to do a little copyright sign at the bottom of your writing. No one's going to steal it. I promise you, no one's going to steal your writing. If you want to put a little copyright sign at the bottom with your name and the date at the bottom of your piece, you can do it. It's very easy to prove plagiarism. It's actually quite rare to be plagiarized. So none of that's really a problem. If your work's in the public domain with a credit from you on it and someone steals it, you can easily prove that you wrote it by handing in your computer and showing your documents to the police. It's not going to happen, I promise. Advertising your work is very interesting. It's a really great question because the flip side of everything being online is that it's harder to be noticed than ever, even though it's easier to speak than ever before. And it's something which even very established writers are struggling with, and artists and filmmakers are struggling with all the time. There's no good answer. There is Twitter, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's TikTok if you want to have fun with making very short little videos. Other than that, there aren't lots of places to go to. There's the old school way, which I recommend, of if you have a very big project to do, such as a book or a collection of essays or a film or a performance, getting together a professionally written press release and sending it to the arts editors or the news editor or whoever is relevant at all of the major outlets. So to me, that would be The Guardian, The Observer, The Times, the FT, The Economist, all of these places, very, very well-respected media outlets. CNN, maybe Vice, if you want to do that. and sending a press release. And if they're interested, they will have all the information at the bottom of the press release. That's as much as you can hope to do. The other thing I'd say about PR and marketing is to be consistent. I mean, Madeline, you know this because you advertise WowFest all the time. Get all the information out there in a way that's brief and attractive, and be consistent. So you repeat the information. You know, remember, social media is not just for chatting. It's a bit like radio. You put out your little advert and you repeat the advert maybe twice a week in the run up to the launch of your project. And you hope that someone notices. The other thing I'd say about PR and marketing and getting your work seen is these things do come back. You tend to think that, oh, I put out this message about my work and nobody listened, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to work. Sooner or later, something does come back that's positive, but you need to have a little bit of faith in that. And it takes time.
Thanks, Bidisha. I mean, I think you're absolutely right about people competing, if you like, for attention. It seems, you know, we've had a digital explosion. I think one thing about the pandemic is it just speeded up the digital revolution that we were in anyway. It just propelled us much further down that road and much faster. And in some ways, it's been great. You know, we've had... as we were discussing earlier, our festival is now as an international week. We can bring in international guests without putting them on a plane, without worrying about our carbon footprint or people's ability to travel. So, you know, there's been many, many positives from this situation in terms of artistic production and reaching people. But I think, you know, there is a lot going on. It's almost like, wow, 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 I could sit on the screen all day. And, you know, so I think that is something that as writers and artists, people are going to have to kind of grapple with. How do you get that attention in such a busy environment, really? But while we're on the topic of publishing, I just want to go back to the essay that I was that I've referred to, The Future of Serious Art, because that's quite an interesting publishing model, isn't it? It's not your traditional, oh, the publisher liked your book. Do you want to tell the audience at home a little bit about how that book was published, or how that essay was published?
I'm so flattered that you read it, Madeline. I really, really am. Thank you so much. Because, you know, it's exactly what you say. Under lockdown, you put out all of this stuff, and I truly didn't expect or believe or require people to get on board with it, because I too am so overloaded with stuff. I will never get to the bottom of Netflix. I mean, I'm now in this wormhole of watching Korean and Japanese and Chinese dramas, and there's like 50 on the list. The Future of Serious Art is an essay that I published at the end of last year that came out as a series called The Future of ... So lots of people who are in public life contributed to this series. It was brought about by Tortoise Media, who are a kind of in-depth investigative media company, very, very thoughtful, very intelligent. And they did it with a publisher called Unbound. Unbound use a crowdfunding model. So they're not like Indiegogo or Just Fund or GoFundMe or anything like that. They choose very, very good upscale projects which are likely to be funded. And they put out a very elegant looking bid for supporters. And it takes a while because publishing is very expensive. It doesn't seem like it's expensive, but it costs thousands of pounds to bring out any publication at all. And the most likely outcome is that you do not make your investment back, because people like to talk about books. Relatively few people actually buy books. It's very odd. They like to talk about the subject, but not purchase the items themselves. So it took a while to get over the hill on the funding on that. I feel very, very mixed about crowdfunding because, as I mentioned, I believe that the government and the state should be supporting creativity, and that we should not, as creatives, be begging the public to contribute to our little sack of funds. And we as quite poor people, relatively speaking to the bankers and the industrialists, shouldn't be impoverishing ourselves, constantly funding each other's projects. I remember once I contributed £1,000 to a documentary about sexual violence in the Bosnian wars, just because I believed in it. Now, £1,000 is a huge amount of money. and I shouldn't be having to pay that. I mean, obviously I did it voluntarily, but we can't all be funding each other's projects like this. So I like the freedom and the creativity of these new funding models. I love the younger generation's DIY attitude and can-do spirit. I really like all of that. I don't like the way that in the last few years, the bottom has dropped out of the liberal market economy. And it's now entered this kind of very late stage, absolutely nihilistic, weird, open, defunded, de-economized situation where everyone is scrabbling about for money. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Jimmy Wales, and a few other American guys. I mean, forget about white men. It's like sort of this little club of quite odd American guys, very unrepresentative of anything, are billionaires, absolute billionaires. They have a kind of wealth which is impossible to imagine. The social inequality of that makes me feel extremely cross. But I'm delighted that you bought the essay. I hope lots of people do.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it, and I just thought it was interesting that, you know, you get to the end and there you can see all, it's not, you know, it's a crowdfund, but you can see all the people who did. So yeah, it's not just people wanted to read it, people wanted to actually pay for it. But I think, you know, there's two sides to it. On the one side, it seems kind of, you know, the crowdfunding thing, it seems like it makes publishing more accessible. But on the other side, you're right, things like that shouldn't be down to philanthropy, really. It's almost like we go down that American route of, you know, rich people can support the arts, and if they don't like it, then kind of we're not going to get that art form, and we're not going to be able to experience that. But yeah, I did find it an interesting model, and a lot of people do talk about, you know, what is, you know, should I go down the self-publishing route? And I think, you know, it's pretty easy to put a book out there, but as you say, it's all that, you know, it's the distribution. We find that right on the wall, the potential of the big publishers to distribute is just much more massive than somebody who's self published. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to go on and talk about other events that have happened across the year that we haven't seen each other for. Obviously, we talked about lockdown, but, you know, one of the big characterizations of the last year really has been protest. And, you know, think about the Black Lives Matter protest, and then the last weekend's protest against the police following the death of Sarah Everard, or the murder of Sarah Everard, and even just last night, what was going on in Bristol against the police bill. And I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think about what is going to be the future impact of art, because obviously art and social justice and protest are inextricably linked. So, you know, what are your predictions for the future around protest and art?
Let me start by saying I'm fully in favour of the protests against racism, violent misogyny, and this kind of new thing that the government are trying to sneak in, which is in favour of a kind of militarised surveillance and policing system. I completely support anyone who speaks out against those forms of control and domination and abuse. I have very mixed feelings about the role of the artist as activists, because I never want any artist to feel that they have to have an opinion about any one particular thing. Some artists see themselves as completely apolitical. They've never thought about these issues. They're simply expressing themselves. Not all artists are very, very self-aware. Some are incredibly self-aware and they're excellent public figures. Ai Weiwei is a wonderful public figure, for example, and he's politicized and he knows how to articulate his politicization. A lot of creatives don't have that level of self-awareness and self-realization, self-articulacy. They're just expressing what comes in from the outside and the inside, and it's all a kind of big emotive creative splurge. Having said all of that, I think the best forms of protest are creative forms, because clearly just shouting and yelling and fighting doesn't work. Because if you fight, I mean, the first thing you're told in self-defense class is if you fight and the other person's stronger and more brutal than you, they're just going to kill you. So you have to, as someone who wants to change the world, you can't use the same methods that the oppressors use. It just doesn't work, because they're really good at breaking the rules. They're nihilists, they're perpetrators, and they don't care what they break on the way to getting power. So you have to express yourself and articulate yourself in new ways. You have to create new systems altogether, and that requires creative thinking. Any scientist will tell you that they came to their breakthroughs through creative thinking, and that means thinking outside the box. And there's a great quote from Einstein where he says, why do I always have my best ideas in the bath? And the answer to that is because that's when you're relaxed. You know, that's when you make lateral connections between different ideas and you see a way forward. And the same is true of politics, and the same is true of creativity. That's exactly why oppressive governments jail artists. You know, it's not a coincidence that they go after the journalists and the artists, the intellectuals first. It's because they know that the artists are connected to all the other areas. And being an artist actually gets you into the most elite places. So you're kind of in this weird world. You don't have imposter syndrome, but you are genuinely an imposter. You are kind of part of the resistance, but you're also part of the elite. And that's a very useful and interesting position to be in, because you see how they really behave. You see how people in power really behave. And you can connect with people at a non-verbal level. So art reaches people in a way that the collected works of Lenin that you mentioned earlier, that we, of course we all have, doesn't always reach people. Because if you say to someone, I am political, please listen to my political views, then 90% of people switch off. And the only 10% that listen to you are the ones that agreed with you in the first place. But if you do it as a performance or a story or just an impression, you know, a lot of post-war art was abstract. It wasn't about, I experienced fascism and this is what they literally looked like. It was, you know, it was very hard-edged abstract expressionism that evoked a feeling. And that's what reached people and what connected with people. So art works very effectively, often in quite counterintuitive ways.
I mean, I think in terms of the Black Lives Matter protests anyway, what that did was it brought in artists, Black artists and Black stories into the mainstream. It's not that they were never there. If you think of Alex Wheatel's been around for a long time, but there he was getting mainstream airplay in small acts and incredible film series. But, you know, those stories and those artists have already been there. And I just think, you know, is this the time when, you know, the voices of those who have previously been excluded, not just Black people, but women, the working class, other kind of neglected groups, if you like, within the arts, you know, is this our time now? Is this the time for us?
It definitely is. And it's really good to see galleries and film production companies and distributors and publishers scrambling about to remember all the people they've like forgotten for the last 20 or 30 years. It's also good just for us as Brits rather than Americans to see UK outlets not just looking to America for their non-white talent, but actually realizing there's so much diversity and grit and interesting talent within the UK. There's a terrible thing that the UK does, which is just sort of passively just absorb everything that America gives us while completely forgetting about diverse homegrown talent. My concern is I want this to be a permanent change and not to be a fashion. So all the publishers who are like, oh, here's our cool anthology of blah, blah, cool young women of color. I don't want that just to be a 2021, 2022 thing. I want them to permanently change their structures. And what I really want to see is the power structures changing behind the scenes. I'm not sure that that's happening, really. I want, you know, commissioners, agents, publishers, producers, film producers, screenwriters, all the funders that, you know, that these people are very powerful, but they're not famous. They all operate behind the scenes. They all know each other. They're very well connected. The net of privilege is really tight, and it's quite a small group. And the higher up I get in society, the more I see it. And obviously I've benefited. Like, believe me, I'm checking my privilege as I speak. That has to change. I'll give an example without naming names. I went in to interview someone at a major publisher at the beginning of 2020, actually, before lockdown. And I was the only person of color in the entire building, apart from the really rude guy on reception who had an attitude with me, like the only other person of color in the room. I went up all the floors of the building because I was looking for the loo. I was the only person of color in there. And on top of that, everyone seemed completely miserable to be working there. And I thought, how can this be in the 21st century that one of the publishers that I absolutely revere, I love their books. That's what it's like behind the scenes. And I felt really uncomfortable. And you know how it is, you feel on the one hand completely invisible and super duper visible at the same time. Like, I felt my voice was like really weirdly loud and my gestures were really big. I'm 5'1", like my gestures are not big. I felt really conspicuous and totally invisible at the same time. And I literally went home and cried on my mum's sofa. And I was like, why have I been courting these people for 30 years of my career, when clearly we're on different planets? So it was like cold water in the face, because if you went to any of that company's events, they were all about diversity and blah, de, blah, de, blah. That was a real moment for me.
Yeah, no, I totally get where you're coming from. I mean, within the art sector in Liverpool, amongst the I don't know, art sector leadership, it's predominantly white, to the point that there's me and another woman who people just keep calling us by each other's names, and it is like, no, you've got the wrong woman. This has gone on for years. But I think, you're right. Part of the problem is when you get into those rooms where it's the people who are making decisions about where funding is directed, about strategy, those are still largely male, white, and, very wealthy people, or at least upper middle class. And I suppose that is, we don't just need a diverse set of artists. We need to get into those structures and maybe break those structures down. That's a much longer conversation, I think. But yeah, so we are nearing our time. You're with us until the 2nd of April. We've got you for 3 weeks.
Oh no, it's a week after. I'm with you until the 9th of April.
9th of April, yeah. So in fact, yeah. So I just thought you might want to round up by giving us a bit of insight into some of the topics you'll be talking about while you're with us on the block.
This is what it's like being a lifelong freelancer. You get very used to going to Muji and buying the enormous desk diary. I've done this every year since I
love it.
I was about 14. This desk diary rules my life. So I'm just literally going to read off it. So the first thing I want to say is we still have some one-to-one slots going free, and they are indeed free. They're half an hour with me. You get to submit just a one-page proposal about a big journalistic project that you are passionate about, and we talk about just that one project in that pitch. Don't send me the article itself. I can't read it. I don't have enough time. But the one-page pitch, which is what you will be sending editors, send that to me and book in for the one-to-ones. We have a Bloc social on Wednesday night, which is called Talking About the News. And I thought that's our chance for us to get together and complain about the kinds of news headlines we've been reading in lockdown. I mean, it seems like every morning there's a kind of bad news bear that writes the headlines, or there's a lot of disinformation, for example, about COVID, about the vaccines. I want us to come to that Bloc social on Wednesday night and show up with some examples of bad news, as in poorly written news, and some examples of really good, clear, informative reporting. So we're going to be celebratory as well. I also want to talk about identifying skills and passions. I think lots of writers want to write, but they don't know exactly what they want to write about. So we're going to work together to figure out, are you a health blogger? Are you a fitness journalist? Are you a reportage specialist or a travel memoirist? We will work out what it is that you should be focusing on and what you're passionate about. We'll also be talking about writing and activism at the Bloc Social next week on Wednesday night. And on Thursday night, just for those beginners who are full of talent and full of energy, but they don't know how to get into the industry, we're doing something called Get Into Journalism. So how do you literally make the contacts that you need? How do you approach editors? What do they expect from you? How does the daily job of being a journalist work? Do you need this diary in front of you at all times? The answer to that is yes, you do. And then the following week on Tuesday, the 6th in the evening, we'll be talking about how to write a pitch. So how do you get in touch with an editor and say, I have this great idea, can I do it? Tell me what to do. There'll be two further things. One is an open house where we expect people to come together and bring about their own writing and to critique each other in a constructive way. So we'll be learning constructive critique skills. And then right at the end on the Friday night, 9th of April, we have a block party. If only it really were a block party at 11 o'clock at night with loads of booze. It's not, it's 4 o'clock, very adult time. School run and they have to put children to bed and do real life things. We'll have a block party to say a big goodbye and thank you amongst ourselves. And so it's going to be a packed, but I hope very inspiring week. And for me too, because I've already read some of the submissions and they're really good.
Brilliant. And at that block party, you will be sharing some of your work that you're going to write exclusively during your residency with us. So yeah, packed and very exciting 3 weeks ahead of us. So I'd just like to say huge thank you for tonight, for your time, for sharing your insights, not just on publishing and writing, but the world at large. And I'm really looking forward to the events that are coming up. So Bidisha, thank you. To those of you at home, thank you for joining us. Do check out the website, www.writingonthewall. Sign up for the one-to-ones and also for the next workshop, which is identifying your skills and passion. And that is all from me tonight. Good night and thank you for joining us.